Hello, investors. This is Todd Thomas, Associate Portfolio Manager with Revere Asset Management. Today is Saturday, May 31st. The time is 11:45 a.m. Coming to you from Boca Raton, Florida, to bring you the Revere Roundup weekend walkthrough. Not much change in the trend gauge. Again, 3 up green arrows as the leaders performed very well this past week. The indexes are well above the 21 EMA and the 50 SMA, and we've held now for 2 weeks above the 200-day simple moving average. We have a yellow sub arrow still, as many of the other indexes are still below the 200-day moving average, and we will be watching that for an upgrade over the upcoming week. Let's go over May's highlights. First of all, on May 1st, we had a notable event for the indexes gap and reclaim their 50-day moving averages, and that was a result of Microsoft and Meta's positive earnings reports. Then on May 12th, the indexes gapped and reclaimed their 200-day moving averages as the U.S. and China trade talks end in Geneva with a significant but temporary agreement to suspend tariff reduction and also reduce tariffs and further commitments to talks. Then on Friday, May 16th, the IBD power trend starts. After the close, Moody's cut U.S. debt rating. And then on Wednesday, May 21st, we had a weak 20-year bond auction causing the 10-year yields to spike and the 30-year yields to jump over 5% temporarily. Also, on May 22nd, the Saudi Public Investment Fund signals deals with NVIDIA and AMD to buy hundreds of thousands of advanced processors for AI data centers over the next 5 years. And on May 23rd, Trump announced 25% tariffs on iPhones that were not manufactured in the U.S. and 50% tariffs on EU, as well as talks stalled. Trump announced sweeping executive orders to advance uranium mining in the U.S. and fast-track nuclear power development on the same day. Overall, since the April 22nd follow-through day, followed with the April 25th swag breath thrust, we followed up with a very strong month of May, with the S&P and the NASDAQ composite up 6.15 and 9.56% respectively, for the best month in 35 years since 1990. And this is just, again, a recap with notations on the chart. Here's the follow-through day, the ZWAG breath thrusts, okay, followed with positive action after that. Then we had the gap above the 50-day moving average, which retraced, okay. Then we followed through the next day, traded sideways, reclaimed the 200-day moving average with a vengeance, post the Chinese-U.S. trade talks in Geneva, advanced very sharply up into a new power trend on Friday, May 16th, and then Moody downgraded the U.S. Credit rating, and we opened down a little bit the next day, but held very well. So that was very bullish. However, then Trump got a little cranky, announced the tariffs on the iPhones in the EU, and we bounced off the 200-day moving average, had a successful test, and last week had a gap open Monday post-Memorial Day weekend and had a very constructive week. All right. This shows the performance of May going back to 1980, and you can see 6.2% is the second best since 1990. All right. Now let's go into last week's highlights. We gapped open, actually that should be Tuesday since we were off Monday, after Friday's successful test of the 200-day moving average, and that was because Trump agreed to extend the deadline for EU tariffs to July 9th. Also, the Court of International Trade blocked Trump from imposing tariffs in order to dismantling of the enforcement mechanism in 10 days. Trump is appealing this ruling, and he has ways of getting around it. Bellwether NVIDIA reported a better than feared fiscal first quarter and said demand remains strong despite the China restrictions. stock gaps, but reverses, and ultimately held the 8-day EMA on the week. Tesla also announced early robotaxi launch in Austin, Texas for June 12th. And finally, the PCE price index came in tame at its lowest level since March of 2021, and bond yields pulled back nicely on the week after hitting over 5% last week or the week before on the 30-year. All right. As a month-end wrap, I like to go into how the various stocks performed on the month. And again, it was a huge month for most of the Mag 7 except for Apple, with NVIDIA up 24%, Microsoft up 16%, Avgo, the leading semiconductor stock, up 25%, AMD up 13%, Apple down, Amazon modest, Tesla 22%, Meta 17%. Big losers on the month, Lilly down 17%, UNH down 26%. And coming up into the defensive areas, flat to up modestly. GE with a big 22% gain, Boeing up 13%. And some of the defense contractors had a good month. Overall, energy was weak, and that is basically a wrap on the quarter or the month. Here are the indexes on the month. Again, 6.2. Q's up 9%. XLK, technology sector up 9%, and the SOX up 11%. VIX was down sharply on the month. SMH up 13%. Metals and gold up to down modestly. And again, bonds down modestly on the month. Bitcoin, the standout, up 11%. And that wraps it up. On the week, modest gains in the Mag 7 on the week with a loss in Apple, Walmart, Costco with earnings this week. GE continued to move on the week. So modest gains overall and modest gains in the ETFs as well. Thought I'd put a chart in here of the record amount of money in money markets announced this week, over 7.2 trillion in money markets and climbing. For the earnings calendar next week, things are slowing down rapidly, but we have Credo, which is of interest, CrowdStrike, Guidewire, Health Equity, Ollie's, Airgen, Dollar Tree, Broadcom, Avago, ABGO, DocuSign, Lululemon, Rubrik. So those are the big ones. And here are the reports by day. On the economic front next week, again, starting a new month, ISM manufacturing, construction spending, and factory orders. On Monday, then we have the ADP employment numbers, the ISM services, the beige book, and then of course, the non-farm payroll and payroll numbers. So unemployment rate and consumer credit. So again, a big leading week for economic numbers again next week. So going to the charts. This is a monthly chart of the S&P up 6%. On the week, 1.8%. Again, holding above all the long-term moving averages and the short-term weekly moving averages. Successful test last Friday of the 200-day and a nice reversal on Friday after a rough start. NASDAQ Composite up 2% on the week, up 9.6% on the month after last month's huge reversal. Okay, Q's up 2%. Again, I'm just going to go through these pretty quickly. Mid caps still below several of the longer term moving averages and below the 200 after trying to get through it briefly. Again, the reason for our yellow sub arrow, it's really a large cap rally at this point. Russell, very weak performance this week, up 1.3%. However, just glancing at this chart, perhaps an inverse head and shoulders on the Russell here, as we have been able to hold up above this 2000 area. Again, long way, still has to reclaim the 200-day moving average, but by far the weakest area. The VIX on the week closed down below 20, but still slightly elevated. The US dollar was slightly up on the week. Bonds came down 4.92% on the 30-year after hitting a high of over 5% last week, and then 5.15% the week before on the week bond auction. The 10-year down nicely at 4.4%. Bitcoin had a rough week, down 3.83% after making highs the previous week. So currently holding the 21 EMA, and a nice pullback after new high attempt got rejected and backing off. Typical Bitcoin. Semiconductor index only up 1%. Rough week for the semis overall. Volatile week as the SOXX tried to get back above the 200-day moving average, got rejected on the NVIDIA reversal on earnings, as well as, again, very sensitive area to the trade, as well as the China, banning China sales and so forth. Gold down 2% on the week. Silver miners were up fractionally, and Europe was up fractionally, and the mags was up 2.3%. And segueing into the mag 7, Apple being the weakest one, up slightly on the week. Let's go also look at the monthlies. Meta with a 17.9% gain on the month. Microsoft looking very good, up 16% on the month, almost at new all-time highs. Again, in this huge stage one base going back to last summer, 26% deep. Google with a 8% gain on the month. Amazon with an 11% gain on the month. And NVIDIA with a 24% gain on the month. Again, overall, not leading by any means like it used to, but was able to reclaim the 200-day moving average on the positive China talks. Been holding those levels nicely. Again, sell the news event on earnings and follow through. But overall, did hold the 21 EMA on the week, or I'm sorry, the 8 EMA. So again, a lot of leaders did sell off on the gap up Thursday morning. Tesla up 2% on the week and 22% on the month. And that is it for the Mag 7. And going into the watch list for the week ahead, again, kept gold stocks off the list, even though there's several that look good. Again, I just want to talk really about best stocks. Spotify with really a 4 or 5 week tight. Can't seem to get going here, but did have a nice bounce off the 21 EMA several times here, and it's holding nicely. So not a stock really related to tariffs or affected by tariffs. Had a nice pocket pivot on Friday on big volume here. So that is potentially actionable here, as it could follow through next week. Duolingo, again, looking at the month, up 33%, huge month. Go into the daily chart, nice bounce off the 21 EMA here. And again, consolidating the gap, again, a 21% gap after a 10% gap back here. So it is digesting nicely and continuing to hold fairly well. And again, a pocket pivot on Friday on nice volume. So these all close very constructively. Netflix, again, just hanging tight into the profit-taking zone after a pretty nice move. But on the month, pretty much market slightly in line to ahead of the S&P 500, up 6%. GEV, a huge standout this month, up 27%. One of the leaders here in the power generation area. Extended, still in the upper end of this buy zone, but acting very well. And again, a pocket pivot on Friday. CEG up 2.9% on the month. Oklo, a follow through of 7.8% on the month on the Trump executive orders, up 122% overall on the month. Again, almost into new high ground, coming up against these old highs. LEU in the enriched uranium sector, up 83% on the month. New scale, new highs this week, up 5.7%, up 93% on the month. Boeing holding the recent highs in this new stage 2 Weinstein trend, up 2.45% on the week and up 13% on the month. Kratos up 2.4% on the month in new high ground. Rocket Lab, bit of a reversal after a strong push earlier in the week, but still closed up 5%. ICO with earnings this week, nice gap and move, up almost 20% on the month and 11% on the week into new high territory. Was able to break through last year's fall highs on the earnings. G Aerospace continues to make progress. Continue to show a couple of these Indian banks as they're back up close to the pivot zone here. India had a very strong GDP number this week, and the foreign markets continue to hang on. These old highs going back from here, this has now entered into new high territory from the past several years. CrowdStrike, earnings coming out next week, very strong. Rubrik extended, but the leading cybersecurity stock, frozen rope straight up into the profit-taking zone here. Zscaler, again, with a nice follow-through this week on earnings, up 8%. Nice earnings gap on Friday. Very strong, but a big move going into that report. Okta should not be on the list. Lagging cybersecurity stock here, but in the buy zone. Dycom, Dave, again, extended. Coupang making progress. DoorDash, another tight week, up 1.2%. Very, very tight up here in the pivot zone. Again, watching this to see if it can manifest some type of strong breakout through this double bottom base pivot zone. And SE with a pullback this week. Chewy strong up into the profit-taking zone. Axon, again, a modest 2.6% on the week, 22% month. These are big moves. Credo earnings next week. A lot of these stocks did not do super well, broke its ADMA, but that's really not that big of a deal. The key will be earnings on Tuesday of next week here. Toast really hasn't been able to make much progress after this earnings gap, but did have a nice test of the 21 EMA and closed at the highs of the day on Friday. Although down on the day, it was a pocket pivot, and that's a buy signal off the 21 EMA. Dutch Bros again with a very strong day on Friday. I believe not leaderboard, but Swing Trader put this on, which accounted for some of the volume here into the close. But again, this is a GROTECTION holding, Toddzilla holding. I like it as well. Shake Shack with a strong 10.3% week. A lot of restaurants looking good. This was up almost 50% this month. Again, huge gains this past month in many of these stocks. Brinker's another name, the owner of Chili's and Maggiano's, building this cup base right now. Darden, this is just in the the pivot zone here, Olive Garden, as well as several other name brand restaurants. Wingstop has been able to make some pretty good progress post earnings and reclaimed its 200-day moving average. Again, the good thing you want to see with a lot of these gaps and movers, riding the 8 EMA straight up. Okay, that's a good sign. Intuit was an earnings gapper the week before, hold up well. Guidewire reports this week, trading very tightly here the last few weeks. Palantir woke up on Friday with a nice pocket pivot. Kind of a volatile day as Trump went back and forth with a lot of rhetoric, as well as Jamie Dimon talking about a potential bond market snafu coming. But overall, Palantir had a strong out of the gate move on high volume early in the day, pulled back, and then shot right back up. Very strong and beautiful pocket pivot Friday. All right, CoreWeave, a little bit of an ugly week here. This is a very nasty shooting star, bearish engulfing candle. Again, I think they raised some more money through a convertible. This is a highly indebted company, but also NVIDIA's all-star company. They've got 350 billion invested in this company, or million, I'm sorry, not billion. But again, could also be a high tight flag formation in development. But again, this with this reversal probably hit its highs for a while and needs a consolidation. Snowflake continued with further gains on the week. Again, post earnings gap here, holding its high volume close day as well as the ADMA. Net is another one which is climbing up the right side, post earnings gap, holding the 8 EMA. DocuSign has earnings this week. Again, single digit growth, very little growth in earnings. So watching that, but going to see what the earning reaction looks like. In Robinhood, one of our best performers in all our portfolios, closed out the week nicely. Again, very close to that old high. Huge move from 30 to 66, over 100%. Again, just biding some time here. LPL Financial, tight. NRG, again, we talked about this last week, holding the ADMA throughout this gap period. AGX extended. Mastech, relative strength, making new highs in the infrastructure area. Again, cup with handle looks good. Vivo with a nice stage one breakout this week on earnings. This is a software company that basically assists companies in the life science and pharmaceutical industry in developing their drugs. This is a pretty powerful breakout, up 19% on 352% increase in volume. This is a power earnings gap, so this is one to watch. Avgo has earnings next week, and this is really the leader in the semiconductor area. Again, riding this 8 EMA straight up here, and big gain, 138 to 242. That's about a 74% gain. So big gains going into earnings here. 25% gain on the month. A-Lab, kind of a weak Friday here on big volume, but still was able to hold its 21 EMA. Axcelis pulling back after an earnings move here, holding its 8 EMA. That's interesting. CLS with a little bit of a pullback this week, down 3%, but again, held its 8 EMA on Friday. Walmart building up into this cup with handle, trading extremely tight. You know, not a fast name, but definitely can move on these breakouts. Ulta Beauty with an earnings gap. A little bit of a close off the high, but could be a new stage 2 uptrend here after a week pullback. Royal Caribbean, some of the cruise stocks are building cup with handles here, and again, decent earnings reactions. Carnival, similar. Johnson Controls up into the profit-taking zone. And Transmedics, a Toddzilla holding. Nice week here, again, after some tight trading post-earnings gap. Test of its ADMA and held, and up 2% on the week and 38% on the month. 3-week tight on insulin pump system maker Insulet, post-earnings gap back here, followed up by a 3-week tight. And again, riding the ADMA. This is really what the leaders are doing, and it's the definition of the power trend. You're seeing this power despite a lot of volatility intraday. Carvana continued to make further progress, up 7.5% on the week. This is a Toddzilla holding after a breakout here, actually right here. So nice to see relative strength making new highs. Again, another one riding this 8 EMA. EQT 4-week tight here in the natural gas area. Natural gas was down about 5 or 6% on the week. So in general, it's showing a little bit of weakness here. I keep watching Seagate. Massive move off these lows, straight off the bottom. Not letting anybody in, not consolidating or basing. Tested the ADMA and into the pivot here. So again, very strong. Very nice numbers going forward after some triple-digit gains in earnings. Strong 20% sales growth, mid-teens. Fairly cheap stock. Oddity, again, definitely a name on the watch list. Nice pullback on the secondary offering, but was able to recover very quickly. Health, another earnings gapper this past week, back above its 200-day moving average. Wanted to show Ethereum. This was a play Ted and Connor did back here. Got into it right back here. Made a nice hit. Ran right into the 200-day moving average. And Ethereum is now in a 3-week tight. So setting up for another possible buy point on a reclaim of the 200-day moving average now, as that 200 is now starting to flatten out. So this looks interesting. Life 360 extended, ON, earnings recovery. Again, shake out below the ADMA, but held the ADMA, looking very tight. CCJ with a little bit of profit taking this week. Fox, big double bottom base breakout on earnings this week, with relative strength making new highs on big volume. Again, not a huge grower here, but they like something about that report. Commvault's another double bottom base breakout. Again, these are a little bit laggy, but again, trading tightly, and again, not the best leaders, but seeing some fall through in other names. Next tracker, getting pulled back, big shakeout below the 8, but closed on the 8. So that's pretty interesting action. That's what you want to see, is these really fast comebacks and then tightness back above this 8. So again, not the most exciting stock or the growthiest stock, but the action is showing good things. AppLovin up 10.9% on the week and 45% on the month. Hammer Sports down 1.7%. Talked about that last week, and again, note the holding of the ADMA here. And that's it for the week. We'd love to hear from you. Please like this video if you find it useful for your weekly preparations. You can reach me or ask me questions at my email at todd@revereasset.com. You can follow me on Twitter at @ToddMichael70. If you'd like to become a client and discuss our programs, give us a call at 855-REAL-WEALTH. and ask to speak with Dan or Don Vandenborg. Thank you and have a great week. Look forward to speaking with you next week.